Greetings and welcome back to our channel. Ladies and gentlemen, some wars never begin with sirens blaring or televised declarations. They creep in through the shadows, quiet as a breath, sharp as a blade. They have no name, no official announcement, and sometimes no one dares to call them what they truly are. But the traces of war are always there. Twisted metal drifting in open seas, charred ship hulls, and people who vanish forever beneath the waters of the Caribbean. And then one day, we wake up and realize these things aren't isolated incidents. They're links in a long chain of a conflict that's been quietly brewing for years, a war that the media tries to shroud in a fog of carefully chosen words like anti-drug operations, deterrence, security protection. But behind these polished phrases, the truth is far more brutal. Today, we'll step into a story that not everyone is ready to face. A silent war between Donald Trump's United States and President Nicolás Maduro's Venezuela. A war conducted in silence where every action, every statement, every accident at sea echoes like the drumbeats of a carefully staged military campaign. Sunk vessels are simply labeled drug boats. The dead are grouped under the term suspects. Airstrikes are described as anti-crime operations. But if it's really just about stopping drugs, why are B-52 bombers involved? If it's only about maritime security, why is the CIA operating deep inside Venezuelan territory? And if it's only about protecting the region, why are the bodies of innocent fishermen washing up on the shores of neighboring countries? Ladies and gentlemen, war today no longer wears the uniform it once did. It dresses in the robes of law, of human rights, of vague reporting. But its nature remains the same, using force to make a nation bend to the will of a more powerful one. And to understand just how close this war has come, we need only look at one chilling signal that sent shivers down the spines of geopolitical observers: the appearance of a B-52 bomber off the coast of Venezuela. That image alone speaks louder than any official warning. On October 16th, a short news brief appeared on the ABC News website, but its impact sent shockwaves through the entire geopolitical analysis community. The United States Air Force had deployed a B-52 strategic bomber to circle off the coast of Venezuela. The report was delivered in a light tone, as if it were just a show of force. But in the language of those who understand warfare, a show of force is never just that. It's a reminder that destruction is only one order away. A B-52 is not built to chase down wooden boats carrying a few sacks of cocaine. It's not designed to intimidate small-time smugglers or maritime traders. The B-52 was made to carry bunker-busting bombs, thermobaric weapons, and even nuclear payloads. Its presence at Venezuela's doorstep cannot be explained by any narrative of drug interdiction. It can only be interpreted as a warning. The United States can strike, and it can strike fast. Without a single official statement, that image said it all. A nation only sends a B-52 to the edge of an adversary's territorial waters when it wants to gauge their response, test their air defenses, or prepare for a potential preemptive strike. The military understands this better than anyone, because the strategy of deploying strategic bombers has always been the opening act of the shock and awe doctrine, paralyzing an opponent's will before open warfare even begins. And what's more alarming is this: that flight was not an isolated incident. It was one piece in a rapidly escalating chain of actions. In less than 7 days, ABC News itself reported a series of moves by the Trump administration. Threats of an attack on Venezuela, confirmation that the CIA was operating covertly within Caracas, orders for strategic bombers to patrol just off the coast, and news of a sixth missile strike on a vessel Washington labeled a narco-boat. But those so-called narco-boats, ladies and gentlemen, were often carrying poor, unarmed fishermen, men who had no weapons, no drugs. There was no evidence, no trial, no international court, only shattered wreckage washing up on the shores of Colombia, Trinidad and Tobago, and Venezuela, alongside the bodies of men who were simply trying to make a living. When a superpower starts labeling every target it strikes as a suspect, the world must understand that language itself has become a weapon, and that the war began long ago. But the bigger question is, who's orchestrating these moves? Who is behind these covert actions that go far beyond the bounds of international law? And why is everything unfolding in such an eerily synchronized manner? To answer those questions, we must look deep into the darkest corner of every U.S. intervention, the CIA and the operations they've launched behind the waves off the Caribbean coast. This is where the story turns much deeper and much colder. Behind the explosions at sea, behind the silhouette of B-52s in the Caribbean sky, there is always a force quietly at work beneath the surface, a current more powerful than any bomb. That force is the CIA. If war is a storm, then the CIA is the undertow that determines its direction, steering Venezuela toward a chasm long chosen in advance. At a White House press briefing, a reporter posed a chilling question to President Trump, one that froze the entire room. Is the CIA operating in Venezuela? And do they have the authority to assassinate President Maduro? Trump dodged the question, but that evasion wasn't an attempt to hide the truth. It was a silent admission. He replied, "I don't want to answer that. It would be inappropriate to confirm." In the world of intelligence, silence is often the clearest answer of all. We didn't need Trump to say it outright. The New York Times said it for him. According to their investigation, the Trump administration signed an executive order expanding the CIA's authority, allowing the agency to conduct lethal operations inside Venezuelan territory. This means their targets are no longer limited to criminal organizations. They could now include high-ranking government officials, even President Maduro himself. The CIA was granted the power to act unilaterally, without congressional approval, and more importantly, without needing a green light from the United Nations. This is a familiar playbook, one the US has used before in Guatemala in 1954, Chile in 1973, Nicaragua, Bolivia, Haiti, and a long list of other Latin American nations. Venezuela is merely the latest name on the roster of countries bold enough to defy Washington's orbit. These operations are never loud. They take shape through small explosions, sudden uprisings, failed assassination attempts, or perfectly timed crises. Every incident is set in motion like a row of dominoes falling with such precision that calling it coincidence feels naive. It's often said that the CIA doesn't need to win every battle. They just need to keep their enemies in chaos long enough for the US to step in and shape the outcome. And in Venezuela's case, the CIA's real objective has never truly been democracy or human rights. History shows they've never genuinely cared about that. What they've always pursued from the 1970s until now is one thing: America's strategic interests. And when it comes to strategic interests in Venezuela, three words stand at the center of global competition: oil, gold, resources. That is the true heart of this war, and it is where the mask begins to slip, revealing the conflict for what it really is. To understand why these covert campaigns have escalated so aggressively, we must move into the next part of the story: who truly benefits from Venezuela, and why they are willing to do whatever it takes to control it. To understand why Venezuela has become the focal point of an undeclared war, we must look closely at the numbers the world rarely speaks about with honesty. Venezuela is not just another South American country. It's a treasure trove, a land so rich in natural resources that its abundance has become a curse. Venezuela holds the largest proven oil reserves in the world, surpassing even Saudi Arabia. And this isn't just oil, it's the key to an endless stream of financial power for any government that controls it. For the United States, a country whose economy is deeply rooted in energy and the dominance of the petrodollar, the idea of a non-aligned nation possessing such a massive strategic resource is more than a geopolitical fact. It's a threat. But oil is only half the story. Beneath its dense rainforests and southern mountain ranges, Venezuela also harbors the largest gold reserves in Latin America. These gold mines, if managed independently, could secure Caracas's economic sovereignty for decades. And that's precisely what paints a target on their back in the eyes of Washington. A regime change becomes not just a desire, but a necessity. Since the days of Hugo Chavez, Venezuela has nationalized its oil industry, thus effectively ousting American corporations from the lucrative pie they long considered their historic right. That move was like ripping food from the jaws of a feeding beast, and from that moment on, confrontation became inevitable. Because when interests worth trillions of dollars are pulled from the hands of the most powerful corporate entities in the US, things never stop at diplomatic spats. The clearest proof lies in the public admission of Maria Corina Machado, a prominent opposition figure strongly backed by Washington. In an American television interview, she once said, "We will privatize the entire oil industry. We will sell state-owned companies to U.S. firms, and America will make a lot of money from Venezuela." That statement wasn't the voice of someone fighting for democracy. It was a pre-written contract, just waiting for a signature. It made clear that the objective was never national liberation, but to reopen the floodgates for Venezuela's resources to flow back to Washington. History shows us that whenever resources are up for grabs, Western powers fall back on the same trio of keywords: dictatorship, human rights, anti-drug operations. These words become the moral veneer for interventions that are, at their core, driven by colossal financial gain. But behind these resource wars, there is one thing mainstream media rarely acknowledges: the innocent lives caught in the crossfire. These are the people who suffer the most every time a superpower decides it's time to reset order in another country. And when the missiles fall into the Caribbean, the first to die are not generals, nor drug lords. They are poor fishermen, those who stand at the very bottom of the power chain yet pay the highest price. And to truly grasp that injustice, we must now turn to the next chapter: the forgotten deaths in the war on drugs that the world only registers through a few cold, detached headlines. The most painful part of any war isn't the political declarations or the defense reports. The deepest pain lies in the stories no one tells, the names that never make it to television, the faces not deemed important enough to grace a front page. And in the invisible conflict between the US and Venezuela, the first to pay the price are often the very people who don't even know they're caught in the crossfire of two powerful forces. In Trinidad and Tobago, local newspapers published a photo that silenced anyone who saw it. Two men, smiling gently, with sun-worn faces shaped by years under the Caribbean sky. They weren't criminals. They weren't cartel members. They weren't drug traffickers. They were just poor fishermen, casting nets near Venezuelan waters to feed their families. One morning, they set out to sea like they had so many times before. By evening, they were floating corpses, killed in a U.S. missile strike described by a single cold sentence, targeting a suspected narco-boat. No photo evidence, no trial, no independent investigation. Just one phrase repeated over and over in Western media: suspected drug involvement. But who gave America the right to kill based on suspicion? Who decided that innocent lives can be erased on the basis of a hunch? In Colombia, President Gustavo Petro, one of the few leaders bold enough to speak the truth, publicly accused, open quote, "Our citizens have been killed in U.S. military operations off the coast of Venezuela," close quote. But those accusations never echoed through global headlines. Those deaths didn't spark international outrage like they would if a Western citizen were harmed. The shattered boats weren't dissected in dozens of think pieces and breaking news specials because the victims were Caribbean, because they were poor, because they came from countries without the media power to make the world listen. And that's where the brutal injustice of this war reveals itself most clearly. When a superpower strikes, the dead are always those who cannot fight back, who have no voice, who have no protection. They are people forgotten by history, erased by politics, turned into emotionless statistics in military reports. But the cruelty doesn't end with the sunken vessels and the bodies drifting ashore. It comes wrapped in a more elegant disguise, a moral veneer painted with expert precision. It wears the names peace, human rights, and international awards. And when a public figure celebrated on a global stage begins calling for military intervention in their own homeland, the world must ask itself, what is peace really being used to justify? The answer lies in the next chapter, where a so-called Nobel Peace Prize becomes a tool to pave the road to war. In the world of politics, few things carry as much symbolic weight as the Nobel Peace Prize. It's like a magic seal, casting a moral halo over anyone who receives it. But sometimes, that very glow is used as a soft weapon, one as sharp as any bomb or bullet. The story of Venezuela is one of the clearest examples. After receiving the Nobel Peace Prize, Maria Corina Machado, the opposition figure strongly backed by Washington, immediately appeared on CNN and BBC with a shocking appeal to the world. Open quote, "We need an international coalition to intervene in Venezuela, if necessary, by force." Close quote. A woman calling for military action against her own homeland, while holding one of the most prestigious awards ever named after peace. It's a paradox so stark, if it weren't true, it would sound like the plot of a dark political satire. But this wasn't an accident, it wasn't the first time, and it certainly won't be the last. For decades, the West has followed a familiar formula. Award the prize, build the icon, elevate the opposition figure, and use them as moral justification for intervention. From Libya to Syria, from Ukraine to Myanmar, the pattern repeats like clockwork. Awards become shields. Human rights becomes the language of strategy. Peace accolades are handed not to those who build peace, but to those who can facilitate regime change in ways favorable to major powers. And behind the elegant rhetoric lies a harsher truth. No award can change the true nature of an intervention, nor can it cover up the fact that every time democracy support is launched, it is civilians who end up paying the price in blood and fire. Venezuela is proof. The Nobel Peace Prize has not made the country more peaceful. Instead, it has made political and military pressure seem more legitimate in the eyes of the international community. It reframes a campaign of coercion as defending democracy. It rebrands a regime change agenda as liberating the people. These beautiful words, repeated enough times, become the perfect veil for the dark machinery at work behind the scenes. The CIA, the Pentagon, and powerful corporate lobbies. In this context, peace is not the goal. It is the tool. And when a prize becomes a tool, we must step back and look at the entire story with clearer eyes. Because what's heading toward Venezuela is not peace, but something wearing a very familiar disguise: humanitarian intervention. But be warned, never let those words fool you, because behind that seemingly noble phrase lies something entirely different: war. And to see that truth in full light, we now move to the next part, where the polished rhetoric is peeled away, layer by layer, revealing the raw and ruthless nature of the intervention unfolding in Venezuela. In recent years, the world has grown accustomed to a concept that sounds noble and humane: humanitarian intervention. It's presented as a moral duty, as if powerful nations are stepping up to protect innocent people from brutal regimes. But ladies and gentlemen, those words are only beautiful when written on paper. In reality, they become a thin veneer, barely hiding the cold, calculated military actions and unspoken geopolitical ambitions beneath them. Venezuela is a textbook example. They call Maduro a dictator, label the government inhumane, and describe the internal situation as a humanitarian crisis, as if by simply slapping on those labels, any attack by a superpower suddenly becomes righteous. But no matter how often those labels are repeated, they do not change the truth. Firing missiles at civilian boats is war. Sending B-52 bombers to the edge of a country's waters is war. Giving the CIA the green light for lethal operations is war. True humanitarian intervention saves lives. It doesn't take them. It means protecting civilians, not creating more corpses washing ashore. Yet what's happening off the Caribbean coast is the opposite. Under the banner of anti-drug operations and the pretense of neutralizing threats, Washington is carrying out military actions no one dares to call by their true name. If you want to know where humanitarian intervention leads, look at Libya. They said they were protecting the people of Benghazi. Then the country was torn into war-torn zones, overrun by militias and human trafficking. Look at Iraq. The promise of regime change to liberate the people became a catastrophe that has dragged on for over 2 decades. Look at Syria, an ancient nation turned into a chessboard where great powers test weapons and strength. These lessons are still fresh, and yet they're being repeated now in Venezuela. And bitterly, every action is justified with grand-sounding phrases. We're defending democracy, we're keeping peace, we're providing humanitarian aid. If those words were true, the world would not be witnessing innocent civilians dying at sea, neighboring countries dragged into chaos, and a nation's resources targeted like spoils of war. The truth is this: when a superpower wants war, it will always find a moral excuse, and the more beautiful the excuse, the more devastating the consequences. So let's not call what's happening in Venezuela humanitarian intervention. Let's call it what it really is: a war wrapped in language, a war where the poor pay in blood while the powerful profit in resources. Ladies and gentlemen, as we look back at the full arc of this story, the most terrifying part isn't the B-52s flying near Venezuela's shores. It's not the vague airstrikes under ambiguous names, nor the covert CIA operations in the shadows. The most frightening part is that all of it is happening, and no one is calling it by its real name. A real war, with real people, real bodies, hidden behind polished language and carefully crafted headlines meant to soothe public opinion. To many, Venezuela is just a distant country in South America, but their story reflects a broader fear, one that haunts any nation bold enough to manage its own resources, to walk a path outside the orbit of a superpower. When a nation is rich in oil, rich in gold, rich in gas, and above all, rich in the will to be independent, it becomes a threat in the eyes of global powers. And so they are branded with every label in the book: dictatorship, human rights violator, corrupt, regional threat. These labels aren't meant to explain, they're meant to justify. Because in today's world, war doesn't need to be declared. It begins with the media, with accusations repeated until they become a new truth. And once public opinion has been shaped, once the world believes a nation is the villain, every military action against them suddenly makes sense. That's when international law is sidelined, and power becomes the only thing deciding who lives and who dies. And while politicians debate, corporations calculate, and intelligence agencies operate, it's ordinary people who pay the price. Venezuelan families struggling under sanctions, fishermen dying without names, children growing up in chaos without knowing why their country became a battlefield. In the end, the question isn't, is the US waging war on Venezuela? The real question is, why does this war have to pretend to be called something else? And more importantly, who benefits from the world's silence? If this analysis has helped you see more clearly through the fog that often clouds global headlines, we invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. The world needs more voices willing to ask hard questions, willing to face the truth head on. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so we can continue this journey together, unraveling the stories the world would rather keep hidden. We'll see you in the next deep dive. This is only the beginning.